Can you hear me now?
Hey, I'm John Peachy. Welcome along to the People Mechanics podcast. You know what I believe? I state it every time that I believe that we will be more smarter and are smarter than me. What I know is this much, and what we know is a great deal. Dan Lake is an executive coach and leadership development expert. He's a good friend of mine from the United States, born in or grew up in both Hawaii and New Zealand. It's not a bad mix, I would say. He's got a master's degree in leadership and last year released his first book in leadership called A Good Leadership Book, which pretty much tells you everything you need to know about what Dan is writing about. He has worked with organizations such as the State Department, Tesla, Google, Apple. He's got some pretty good pedigree. He has over 3,000 hours with senior leaders in these organizations. Dan's also got a pretty interesting pedigree in terms of he spent nearly 20 years in coaching and also working in NGOs in over 30 different countries. He's got I think, some skin in this game. Dan Lake, welcome.
Thank you, John. So excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's good to have a Kiwi with a bit of a twang there from the other side of the world. So what part of the US are you staying in at the moment?
Currently in Dallas, Texas, and I know that right now in New Zealand, I talked to some friends the other day. They said it was 1 in Dunedin and about 10 in Auckland. And today I think we're at 33, and that's just about warm.
Yeah.
It gets up to about in the mid 40s here. So summer's still coming.
Yeah, that's crazy. My daughter's living in Indiana at the moment, going to be marrying some slimy US young man. But anyway, that's another story. I'll weep into my coffee later. But yeah, but she left here at 31 degrees and arrived there at minus 21. So she had it in the winter, obviously. So extremes. Mate, so good to talk to you, and congratulations on the book.
Thank you. Thank you.
You know this, I love your perspective on leadership, and I really wanted to talk to you part one of a bit of a series to talk about leadership through your eyes, what you're seeing and what you're feeling. So tell me about the temperature of leadership. What are you seeing in the US? What's kind of the hot topics that people are grappling with in the US?
Yeah. Such a good question. I feel like there is a little bit of a wind change in the keywords that you hear. If I think back to pre-pandemic, a lot of the words that were coming up were things like agile, ways of working, the future of work. And if you could somehow interweave those kind of keywords into your job description or into your advertising poster, you were guaranteed to get an audience or a voice at the table. Now it feels like there's a lot more, certainly conversation or grappling with an increasingly hybrid economy. That's a big one, is the hybrid workforce. Are we working from home? Are we working in locate? Why are we doing what we're doing, and where are we doing it? Is not only a hot topic, but it's a practical, tactical, and there are some great stories out there, and then there are some terrible stories too, of organizations creating hard and fast lines maybe after 3 or 4 years of pandemic work, and losing portions of a workforce because of some of those policies. So I think that work from home or work from anywhere dichotomy is one of the topics that's coming up. And then another one is obviously AI. It's hard to get away since the launch of OpenAI last year, ChatGPT, and there's I think there was a wave of excitement, and now I feel like we're at a wave of cynicism. And what does that do for leadership or not? Or maybe not cynicism, skepticism is perhaps, or cautious optimism. I don't know how you define that, but there's something there where the shiny veneer, the chrome has rubbed off a little bit, and people are looking to say, well, what is this actually going to change in terms of our organizational leadership ability, capability? Where does this carry us in 3 to 5 years, or 30 to 40 years.
Yeah, and interesting. I have been in conversation with some guys from Microsoft who are really leading some of this area in AI, and hearing stories of some of the practical products which are being delivered and some of the outcomes. And it is sci-fi. It is mind-bending. It is exciting in some respects, but boy, there is, yeah, I think cautious optimism is a great way to describe it, Dan, because I think a lot of people who will not admit it or discuss it openly would be very, very concerned about their jobs and the impact of that. And the big question, you know, it's almost a whole series. What happens if it goes wrong? What happens if the AI does something stupid, right? So I was listening to Elon Musk just recently talking about the fact that you go back 30 or 40 years and the computer game was two little bats that hit a ball bouncing on the screen. He's saying within a few years, the reality will be almost impossible to tell the difference between game and reality when you're engaging, you know, on a screen and that. So, and that really leads me to a question, because when I say engaging on a screen, yeah, we're talking on the screen today because of necessity. Tell me about the practicality, competence of leaders working with real people, you know, real situations, real people, real need. What are you seeing? What are you feeling about the way that we are leading people?
Such a good question. I think more than ever, the kinds of things that I know you are really passionate about as well, the passion of this is really about people. The role of leadership is to define where are we going, to acknowledge the people that we're going there with, and empower them to go there with us. And so there's this piece of as a leader, you have to have some ownership of this is the direction that we move in. And there's a clarity and a focus that is required to say we're not going to go there and we are going to go over there. You know, we're not going to get distracted. And so I think that in the world today, and that's whether it's on screen, whether it's face to face, whether you have half of your team based in Ukraine or India or Argentina and your other half is, you know, in New Mexico. What's required is an ability to remove distractions more than ever. And it's not simply, I think things like an iPhone or an Android phone, smartphones, tablets, that's cannon fodder for distractions. The real distractions are the meeting after the meeting, the lack of clarity up front about what are you actually trying to do, the lack of strategic know-how, a lack of empathy in conversations that caused you to say something in a meeting or in a particular context that required 3 or 4 follow-up meetings to deal with that one thing that you weren't self-aware about. And so what started out as a 10-minute conversation has turned into 4 hours of follow-up. That's distraction. That's taking people away from the things that are most important and most valuable to them. And so I think distraction is one of the biggest things that people need to begin to grapple with.
Isn't that interesting? Because, you know, your organization is called Lead, Coach, Release, and I want to talk about that. But the fact is that what we're engaged in is the business of leading, and leading has to have at its forefront direction, just as you're saying.
Yep.
Right? And a couple of quotes come to mind. Max Dupree, who was the CEO of the Herman Miller furniture business, iconic chrome and leather chairs in the mid-century, he said that the first role of leadership is to define reality. And I love that, because in that implication is clarity of direction, clarity of where the heck we're at. You know, sometimes I really upset leaders by saying, well, we are where we've been led, guys. That's the reality. Yep. Where we are is where we've been led to. If you don't like where we are, you're going to have to change your leadership. You know, either personally or corporately, change the people who are leading us. And secondly, this whole idea about confusion after a meeting after a meeting. That's a stunning statement. I see this all the time. You know, the conversation goes on once you've left the room, and that's dangerous, right? I kind of say, you know, one of our roles as leaders is to direct where conversations happen. and you want to
Yep.
have them in the room with you. And there's a marketing expert guy who wrote a book called Blue Light Jazz, Donald Miller. He says this wonderful thing, and kind of hard to hear, but he says, people will not follow you into confusion, which I think is a stunning statement. People will not follow
I
you.
love that.
So tell me about, so Lead Coach Release, you're about lifting the competency, can I say that, of leaders.
Yeah.
I've been a little critical in this country of the lack of competency that, and let me put that caveat in that in brackets, is that we're not spending enough time feeding our leaders because they're firefighting. They're so busy putting out fires that they're not getting to the self-development, I think, the self-development area. Tell me about that from your perspective, what you're seeing and what you're doing in terms of self-development of leadership.
I think one of the best things we can do as leaders is create permission for those around us to develop themselves. That's one of the key functional things that we do is acknowledge the necessity, elevate the importance, and create the space for ourselves and for other leaders, and leader being synonymous with the idea of influence, very much a Maxwell version of what is leadership. So whether we have direct reports, whether there's no people or 1,000 people sort of around us, the idea that we have influence in our world, influence in our families, whānau, influence in communities. And so we all are leaders in some capacity. And so therefore, to your kind of question or statement is this idea that self-leadership is incredibly important. And so some of those pieces are the self-leadership of clarity, this idea that we have to be clear on where we're going and then managing the risks associated with going there. So that's all part of this package of clarity. Then I think there's a second piece of it's an allocating of resources, and that's a self-awareness of time, finances, emotional state, physical state. It's no good being the greatest leader in the world and having a heart attack at 42. It's no good being there's a reason that sleep torture is used as a form, like sleep deprivation is used as a form of torture, but we do it to ourselves. People go from, they're often their youth, parents saying, hey, you need 8 hours of sleep. Sometimes they're getting 9. By the time we're in uni, people are down to 7 or 3, depending on how hard you party. And maybe you come back in your 20s or 30s and settle down at about 6 hours of sleep. But that is unsustainable for a 30-year career. Or 40-year career where people are retiring later and later. And so this idea that we are hurting ourselves through a lack of self-awareness. So there's all sorts of things built into permission to, it's like, you jump on Air New Zealand and head down to Tauranga, and they say, hey, if something happens, a little oxygen mask will come down. And so put your own oxygen mask on first before helping those around you. And that's really the same in our leadership journey, is in a healthy dose of selfishness. So we're not moving into toxic leadership. That's a whole separate kind of conversation. But there's we cannot afford to grind and hustle the way that Instagram or LinkedIn or social media or maybe a broad cultural interpretation would tell us that we need to, and in any way be effective in the long run. So I'll get off my soapbox. I don't know if I've answered your question.
No, it's not. It's a great soapbox, and I think the oxygen mask analogy is a great one. I really do, because when you analyze when people become resentful and when things do go wrong in professional relationships, I'd love to know how much sleep the person has had the night before. I remember hearing a very senior HR leader in a very large organization in this country say, I had a bad weekend. I came to work on Monday morning and told people, stay out of my way today. It's like, just keep out of my way. And it was kind of like, wow, Okay, how's that working for you? You know, and I think we neglect, or somehow we believe that we're Superman, Superwoman, and that we're not subject to the simple things that you're talking about, sleep. And it's funny because one of the little kind of mantras I use is I ask people, who do you take home at night in your head? You know, who
Oh, I like
occupies your
that.
headspace? And that effectively means that they're robbing you of your sleep. And I literally ask leaders, who are you thinking about when you wake up at 2 and 3 in the morning? And they can immediately say, I'm thinking about that guy Dan who's driving me nuts, right? And so we've just got to look after ourselves so we can look after our people well. That just
Yeah.
makes sense. You think about mothers and children and families and rest. I mean, just there's great analogies. But I'll take the oxygen one because I think that's very, very cool.
There's an idea, and just building on your statement there, around the idea that as leaders, we are our team's dinner conversation. Our people are going to go home and they're going to sit at their dinner table and talk to their partners or spouses or extended family, children, grandparents, whatever. And when our name comes up, and it invariably will, what's the tone of that conversation as a reflection of our, quote unquote, leadership prowess?
Yeah, that's a great point, and you're right because your name will come up, and you want it to come up in a positive context, right? Not a negative context. And I think too much of that happens. And it comes back to the old thing, what? People don't leave organizations, they leave leaders. And if we haven't shown, part of leadership is, the kind of mini me concept, people learn from us, they watch us. And when you ask a bunch of people, tell me about good and bad leadership over the years, they will quote you the great people they've worked for, and they will tell you why those people have been
Yeah.
good. And unfortunately, likewise, they'll tell you the other side of the story. I worked for this guy who was terrible, and he did this, this, and this. People are sponges; they're observing us, same as our kids are observing us for behavior. So it's true to say that leadership is caught, isn't it? It's observed in the majority of cases.
Yeah, I think there is. I mean, as you mentioned in the introduction, I have a master's degree in leadership. I've studied, I've read, I've written a book on leadership. I think there is incredible value in the academic, cerebral unpacking and understanding but I think that value is to put language to experience.
Nice.
And leadership cannot happen purely in the pages of a book. It is only through an experience. It's only through an application. It's only through, I think most often, a beyond the comfort zone experience, which then elevates the importance of the self-awareness, the emotional intelligence, the idea of emotional contagion, the idea of crucial conversations or of delegation. All of these things, they're uncomfortable things to do because they are either inherently vulnerable to ourselves. Oh, I didn't show up the way I wanted to. Or they're inherently vulnerable towards someone else. Oh, I have to trust you to deliver on this thing in a way that I expect/hope or exceed that expectation/hope. And so leadership is an incredibly vulnerable space. But if we are living in a world of perhaps social media, again, not to blame everything on social media. So I think it's the fastest example, but the wider world, we are living in a world of perfection. Before our call, you and I were discussing the idea of or the influence of quarterly earnings reports and annual reports on business and economics. Even that degree to which there is an expectation of sustained annual percentages of growth, sustained perfection doesn't allow for vulnerability. It doesn't allow for experimentation and failure. People say sometimes in business, oh, fail fast. They don't really mean that. They don't want you to fail. What they mean is experiment at no cost with zero risk and deliver another 15% annual profit. And so to my sort of original point is this idea that leadership is inherently vulnerable, which then goes back to earlier, this idea of self-awareness or self-leadership being incredibly foundational to our leadership journey.
Yeah, well said, man. That's a great statement to unpack right there, and we'll get the transcript of this conversation, because I think that's wonderful gold that you're describing there. Yeah, I'm very much about longevity and the long term, and making sure that we've got all the elements in place that we can last the distance. And one of the joys that I've got at my age, I'm 61, coming up 62. Yeah, I know people say, "You sure? You look like you're over 70." But I love sitting down with elderly, if I can put that way politely, elderly men and women who've been through the system, that, you know, have served in various organizations for 40 or 50 years, and ask them, tell me what you see. Tell me what the pitfalls are. And I love this whole idea. I've been doing some research on where knowledge comes from, practically in our organizations, and looking at the idea that wisdom is knowledge over time, mitigated by the reality of experience. Is that we, you know, the book says this, and I love what you're saying about the way to take, you know, we need the academic research, absolutely, but we've got to balance that with context and understand how that applies to people, and you know, people doing well. Dan, thank you so much for the conversation. We've only just scratched the surface of this, and I'm going to ask you to come back and let's look at some more, because you've got some great wisdom, and thankfully we've got a good Kiwi guy doing some stuff in the US, and balancing the nonsense.
Well, happy to help anytime. Yeah.
Dan Lake is the founder and CEO of Lead Coach Release. His pedigree speaks for itself. You can find him at leadcoachrelease.com. The book is called A Good Leadership Book. Is that correct?
Correct.
Available where all good books are sold. And Dan, thanks so much, and let's talk again.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely my pleasure.
Can you hear me now?